Big Visible Testing, Claire Moss.
Hi, I'm Claire Moss, and I'm here to talk to you about Big Visible Testing. For those of you who like to tweet, you can see my Twitter handle, A Clarification, here in the header, and my talk's hashtag is #BVT, along with the conference hashtag #CAST2012. I've always thought of myself as an Agile tester, so that's why my talk is riffing on the Big Visible Charts concept from Agile. However, over the last year, I have been transforming into a truly Agile tester, working as part of a Scrum team. I have a cross-discipline team there, and we build a nearly greenfield product. Sorry. The other members of my product delivery team are from a mix of disciplines. They do not have a background in software testing as I know it. This audience for my testing requires transparent, quick information access in a form that best suits their distinct perspectives. It has been a learning curve for all of us, and I hope that you benefit from our experience. I hope you will leave this presentation with a fresh perspective on your product team members so that you can focus on the value of the testing artifacts that you produce. One of our Scrum artifacts that we produced for our product is the definition of done. As you can see, we define the results we want for each story with an emphasis on quality. So the testing information needs to support this value. You may notice that the product team isn't interested in the overall picture of testing process in the way that my testing manager is. They want more short-term feedback from testing so that they can do something about it. My first attempt to educate my teammates about testing was to create a low-tech defect dashboard, or as I like to call it, the bug board. I started with defects because my teammates already had some understanding of the relationship between software development and that form of testing feedback. I wanted to meet them where they were and to collaborate on the testing reporting they needed to schedule, design, and implement the stories. Imagine my delight. One morning, I came in to work to find that my bug board had been rearranged because it had been the focus of some fruitful discussion by my product owner team, and that's the group of folks who make the decisions about what to do in the product. As our pilot release progressed, we had deeper discussions about how testing serves the team, and I gained insight into the various disciplines, ways of thinking, and preferred means of communication. After we reflected on what we learned, I resolved to apply this to future experiments. We iterated, and I came to see my teammates as quite distinct customers of my work. I began to think of them in the way that they think of their customers, applying the lessons they taught me to themselves. And so I developed user personas corresponding to what value each of my teammates emphasized. Since these personas are quite detailed, I will only be able to hit the highlights in this presentation, but see me afterward. I'd love to talk to you more about it. I began by focusing on the goals and greatest concerns for each of these roles. Since my personas can be proposed ad hoc and evaluated through research, I began with a guess based on my past experience and tested that against my current context. So here, my first one is Ben the business advocate. You may have seen him labeled as the product manager on a previous slide, but actually he's very concerned about looking at things from the business perspective. So his major concerns are, can we ship it? How little can we do to keep moving? And does this affect the bottom line? So those are the things I want to keep in mind when I'm trying to help him determine what value testing is providing. So we started by, for Ben, I chunked the bugs by severity because he wanted to know how bad was it. So we talked about what form would make sense to him and decided to redesign a little bit. So we put it here in a descending order of, so that the two rows at the top were the worst things. We decided our product couldn't ship with things in those categories. And so when he sees that those two buckets are clear, then he says, hey, let's get a return on our investment, ship it. Although he's the CEO of the product, his is not the only perspective to consider. So his motivation is right, but he needs a little more information. So this inherent tension between the business motivation and what drives my second persona, this is Ursula. She balances the team by bringing a sharp focus to the users, whom she knows deeply through broad customer contact, whether it's through usability testing or contextual inquiry, and she sees the system through their eyes and frequently prefers a visual representation of the impact on the user. So her major interests that I can help with are show me, I want to experience it, and what are other possible solutions. So for Ursula, I tried organizing bugs around a sitemap that I constructed for our web application. You could certainly do this with any application. Ursula is a doer since she designed the user experience. In Scrum terms, she's a pig. In UX terms, she's a primary persona. I want to optimize my quality information for her use in problem resolution. And since Ursula is also a judicious perfectionist with a focus on consistency, she and I have a great relationship and collaborate closely. I use her designs and user research to feed into my test design, and she uses my granular test output in the larger context of the product. So Ursula consumes defects in clusters more than she does one at a time, so we revise the bug board accordingly. I can enhance the bug board even more by focusing on efficient translation into her action. Thus, describing problems as a scenario emphasizes when and how bugs impact the user's day-to-day life with the software so that she can iterate on the user experience, which encompasses more than just the graphic design. In turn, I can provide feedback and critique on her mock-ups and prototypes, asking helpful questions. While everyone on the team is conversant with software from our own usage, no one has as deep an understanding as Todd the technologist, and sometimes he has to explain his recursion jokes to the rest of us. But his major concerns are, does it work? How bad is it when it doesn't? What's next to do? And is it sustainable? As the principal doer on the team, he is my highest priority customer. Although Ursula has the chops to get into the user interface code, Todd is the one who keeps things running smoothly behind the scenes. Test-driven development and automated checks are his first line of defense against bugs, so he may respond with puzzlement to the presence of the bug backlog. So we're going to translate it for him. First, we tried scheduling a time box for fixing, we called it the bug bucket, to attack our most urgent concerns, since Todd cares about what is highest priority work so he can attack it. However, Todd is not interested only in an expedient solution. He also wants to keep the product sustainable, so he may report issues for the backlog, and those are these green stickies here, that incorporate technical debt. And that can tell us about bugs that we have not yet identified that may emerge, and also relates to the clustering of defects in the product. Ursula is not the only one who likes a good user scenario, so we shifted to relating bugs to stories scheduled for sprints. After all, Todd needs to know the whole picture so he can incorporate refactoring and bug fixing in the estimate along with the feature enhancement that together produce the value for the user. He also likes preventative measures such as a scripted smoke test that covers a story's acceptance criteria, which is just another way for him to know that the story's done. So that brings us full circle. We're going back to Ben, who makes the ultimate judgment on whether the story is done when he runs the application against the acceptance criteria. So for this picture, you can see there are purple stickies on the right that are in the past column. Those represent our acceptance criteria that we've identified for the story. And although Ben may be a secondary persona for me, one that I want to accommodate, but not as directly as my primaries, he benefits from all the testing information along the way, since he has confidence when he accepts that story. Our current sprint board informs Ben about the status of our sprint story progress, including the defect discovery. So here, there's a fail column with a couple of yellow stickies in it. Those are holding up that story from being accepted. So now that our whole team is understanding where those defects a bit better, we have also begun to incorporate exploratory testing charters in our story so that everyone can see the progress of testing over time and what charters are encumbering the defects. So here we have a couple of defects that have come out of the exploratory testing for this story, and we have a couple of testing charters that haven't even started over here on the left. So we can tell that those two things are not related. In the done column, there are a couple of exploratory testing charters that did uncover those things. Now, not all of these bugs discovered in the story are actually related to the charters of those exploratory testing sessions, but when they come up, we address them right then. We decide whether we dispose of them. They may not be fixed right away, but we certainly want to take them into account. So I have been able to involve everyone in the team in exploratory testing to some degree, and our product's users will reap the benefit of that common understanding that we build by pairing. After all, while I may be in the information business as a tester, it's all ultimately in service of our users. So I want to specially thank Will and Astrid, who are my user experience folks, who taught me all about user personas and the role that UX plays in software development. But I want to thank my employer, Daxco, for sending me here to CAST so that we can confer today. And thank you, my audience, for your time. I'd like to take questions from those present or anyone following along at home.
Thank you very much, Claire. And we already have our first question and our second. So, Hilary, you're first.
Thanks for explaining all that. I would be very much interested in how the non-testers do at exploratory testing and how you actually educate them in becoming better at it.
Okay. I don't anticipate bringing in someone to do exploratory testing for the first time who's never seen it. So what I would prefer to do is start with a lower barrier of entry. So I want them to pair with me. And if you've seen paired programming, you'll know that often someone's hands are on the keyboard and another person is sitting in a sidecar next to them. They may have their own keyboard, they may not. So there's the opportunity for both people to participate directly, but it may be instructive for me as the tester on the team to do the exploratory testing and vocalize what I'm doing, allow them to see how I manage the flow of the session, and then after that, if they feel comfortable, we have done exploratory testing concurrently, where we'll each be at a separate machine and we'll be doing different charters at the same time, and then we can talk back and forth about what's going on. And if one of us finds a problem, then we look to see whether it came from one person's action or the other. It might even be interactions between the two of us.
Okay, Thomas.
I have one sort of procedural question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you make multiple copies of the bug stickies for all of these different views?
No, we don't maintain them simultaneously. One of the things I wanted to do was to iterate on how we're presenting that information. So over the course of the past year, we've tried different representations. What we found is that this representation where we incorporate the exploratory testing, the bugs and the acceptance criteria is the primary way to consume it. But the only defects that you'll see here are the ones that we currently have scheduled. So we also will have a separate bug board. And what we've done so far is to maintain it in this format, where we can see the clusters of things, because that's useful when we are prioritizing stories in our backlog. We're often pulling from a theme or an epic, and so we will pull things from a particular area to work on concurrently, so we're not context switching too often. And also we care about completing features, so we will also address bugs in that area where we already are touching on a story. Now, urgent concerns that would keep us from shipping would come up anyway, so we might deviate from our plan to attack those things. But if they require a little more planning, then it might make more sense to defer them to the next sprint and deal with them when we have more time to allow for that.
Marcus?
Is somewhere else.
No, Matt.
That's okay. So I may have misheard you, and I'm pretty sure I misunderstood your intent.
Oh.
So I wanted to ask you to clarify. And it's different than the way it's usually articulated. I think it's interesting, and I want to hear your perspective. I think it's good. But I thought I heard you say something like Timmy the technologist or Paul the programmer or some alliteration was your primary customer.
Yes.
Can you, so you historically in the literature, testers are, and I'm not saying this is good, but they're seen as sort of the advocate for the customer, and they're there to defend the customer against the sort of lazy programmers or whatever. Like so you're suggesting something very different, and I was hoping you could elaborate on it for a minute or two.
Okay. So what I'm concerned about here is my particular Scrum team, the people on my product team who can do something about the defects that we're uncovering. So I'm not preparing this information for my boss. It's not about defect counts or any of that. It's about who is a doer, who can get into the code, diagnose a problem, and resolve it. And the people who can actually intervene would be my programmer, Todd, the technologist, or my user experience designer, Ursula, the user advocate. Those two actually can get into the code and make a decision technically to accomplish the work. So that's why I think of them as my primary personas, because my information is meant to be acted upon. And so this is not about planning. This is not about the progress of the testing for the product before it can be released. It's more about right here and right now, what do we do about these things?
We have a comment from Sigge.
I would like to also answer Matt's question. I think what we're seeing here is like a perfect match of what you want to call testing in your project, because testing is a service that you provide to your project team and product. So I think we got the closest thing to that by Claire. So that's what I think.
Thank you. One new thread from Scott.
Some of this you've already answered from Thomas's question, but I was trying to figure out how to apply this to my project. And it's an old project. We've got about 700 open bugs, and in our product backlog, we've got about 50 stories right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the ideas of moving around the stickies. There's a great satisfaction in being able to say, we got this done, and see that kind of progress. But I think you may have answered the question. You just have one board. You don't have multiple boards.
It's true. We maintain one bug board and one sprint board. So making it visual is particularly helpful for my team when we're talking about near-term things. So if you have, hundreds of bugs to deal with, that's a lot of stickies to try to visualize. So if you're not going to attack it in the near future, or if it's not in an area where you're working, it may be distracting to try to represent that. If you know that you're concentrating on an area of requirements, features, or stories, like we have epics that we're burning down toward our release, then you can concentrate on the near-term work, and that might be a bit more manageable in terms of the physical artifacts. But we also use our bug and story tracking are in the same tool. And so we're able to establish relationships between those. And so when you go to look at a story, I can say that this story is related to an entire list of defects. And so in that way, you don't have to necessarily visualize it if you don't have a co-located team or something like that. But I personally find that it is much more effective to have these defects in with the work that we're doing, because they really are another unit of work, the same way we would have to do the exploratory testing charters or the tasks to accomplish the story implementation. So for me, having those things co-located helps me as a tester to see where I am, how productive are my exploratory testing charters, but it also helps our team to figure out when we're going way off the rails. If there were 18 yellow stickies in that fail column, then we may not make our stories this sprint. So this near-term work is very important for my team, my product team. And in terms of managing the entire defect backlog, it may not be very practical, especially for an older product. But when we looked at that severity, let's see, where's that slide? When we looked at the severity, here, we have a lot of Sev 3 and Sev 4, and those have a particular written definition. It's too tiny to read on this slide, but those are defects that we could still ship with. They're things that we can negotiate among the stakeholders in my team, but they won't stop us from providing this product to our user. So those things, if we have decided they're deferred till later or they're not part of our minimum viable product, we may not need to keep those visible. But you never know there are different perspectives. That's part of my product owner team, is that I'm balancing the needs of several people. And so when I'm looking at the things that they're interested in, they all advocate for different parts of the stories. The bugs may be cosmetic, but the classic is if you misspell the company's name, then you probably don't want to ship with it like that. So that may be a simple user experience or UI bug, but it might have a very high priority. So I think it's very helpful to keep the focus on the near-term work and the work that is likely to be accomplished rather than all of the things that could be done. So it may be that if you have hundreds of defects in your backlog, if they're not coming up over many cycles of epics and areas of features, that you may want to talk to your team about whether it's worth maintaining those.
I think, unfortunately, we're running out of time.
So if you want to catch me later.
We have 3 questions still. One from Thomas, Matt, and sorry, I don't know your name. So, Liz. So maybe you can catch up in the break.
So if you can't find me in person, because I know we probably have some folks online, you can find me on Twitter or you can email me. And I am online blogging at aclarification.com. So thanks so much, you guys.
And that was the last presentation for this session, so we now have a break until the next session starts.
That was Big Visible Testing by Claire Moss.